Hello, everybody. Welcome to, I can't believe this, episode 37 of the new MDs. And what a special show we have today. This is broadcasting live on 4 platforms: Rumble, YouTube, Facebook, and X. And we're talking about food, MAHA, pesticides, and power, and what's really changing in DC and what it means for families. And we have a special guest, Kelly Ryerson, who I will introduce in a second. But first, allow me to tell you who I am. I am Dr. Michelle Perro. I am an integrative physician. I am CEO and co-founder of GMO Science, author of What's Making Our Children Sick with Dr. Adams. And that new book will be out shortly. It's sitting on my desktop, almost ready to fly, and I'm very excited about that. I don't think there's going to be any more books after this. I'm kind of done with the book writing thing, but hopefully I'll get this out of my system for parents. But I want to really just sort of dig in to Kelly Ryerson and glyphosate facts and Kelly's amazing organization. And I'm going to read your bio, Kelly, because it's super good. It's awesome. So allow me to tell you a bit about Kelly, and I'm going to read it, who works at the intersection of agriculture and health. She regularly collaborates with regenerative farmers, scientists, policymakers, and media to address the damage caused by agrochemicals to our soil and bodies. And boy, Kelly and I have been at this a bit. She's a co-executive director of American Regeneration and the founder of the news site Glyphosate Facts. Kelly has contributed to numerous podcasts, publications, and documentaries, including the recent award-winning doc, Common Ground. Please watch that. It was amazing. She's an ambassador for the Rodale Institute. We love Rodale. And Kelly has a BA from Dartmouth, an MBA from Stanford Graduate School of Business, and completed training in integrative health coaching at Duke Integrative Medicine. So welcome, Kelly, to the new MDs.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Dr. Perro and I have worked together for many years now on these issues, and so it's always nice also to reconnect.
Thank you. We have, and we've been in DC together for a couple of dances, but I thought, you know what, I was sort of flummoxed and not up to date on what is really going on in DC, because finding media outlets that I trust has become like a vetting process needing a PhD. Mainstream has left me with some disappointments, and then I'm just in this constant vetting process. And so you are a trusted friend and colleague, and I thought you'd bring us up to date on what's happening in DC. And I wanted to start with MAHA. It's like make America healthy again. So perhaps you can. I think there's not an American who hasn't heard the phrase "Make America Healthy Again," MAHA. But maybe our listeners aren't sure what it means in practice. How would you explain the agenda in lay people? Is it a formal plan? Is it a philosophy? Is it aspirational? Maybe you can just give us a little background about MAHA, and we can get into what's going on with MAHA.
Yes, absolutely. So Make America Healthy Again, MAHA, is a movement that has collected so many of us that have been working in this integrative space for some time. We have not had much of a home, I would say, for many years politically, and to be able to raise our voices and collect together to make an impact as a group. And so what happened is, as many people know, RFK Jr. had an independent presidential run, and I personally got to know him when I was blogging the glyphosate cancer trials, because he was one of the attorneys that was suing Monsanto in the courtroom. And back then, he certainly didn't talk really about any type of political ambition. He just was this environmental lawyer who was really focused on those issues. So when he ultimately came out and was running for president, I had met millions of people were thrilled because he was finally putting to words these issues that we absolutely need to make front and center in all the decisions that we make in order to protect our children and our health. So we gathered together. He had a great presidential run, was hitting about 10% in the polls at a certain point, but clearly in the end, he wasn't going to be winning. But it was a very decisive factor in terms of who the election would swing to. Would it be President Trump or Kamala Harris? And he actually reached out to Kamala Harris and that team. They didn't want him or us. And so who did want us? President Trump, and was willing to put him in a leadership position. So a big group of people ended up with this new term, Make America Healthy Again, obviously in parallel to Make America Great Again. And it's been really interesting because there's so much passion behind it, but also just an enormous amount of critique that for people like you and me, of course, we're used to this anyway, because it's the same old industry complaints about, like, anti-science people, conspiracy theorists, all these things that we're very accustomed to. But now there's a nice cozy name under HHS, Secretary Kennedy in Maha. So we, there's been so much hype around it. And there were two different Maha Commission reports President Trump asked Bobby Kennedy to be in charge of. He released the first one. The first report came out in May at the White House, and all of the different heads of agencies. So it was also the head of the USDA, head of the FDA, head of the EPA. All of these leaders are together, and they put together this document. And the document summarized the issues that they think are at the base of the chronic disease epidemic. And so anyone who's listening to this would likely be able to list those off really, really quickly. What are these things that are causing the chronic disease epidemic? And certainly pesticides were a part of it. And so that first report came out. In that report, it said glyphosate and atrazine are problems that we should look at. By the time the second report came out, the follow-up, the names of the pesticides were dropped, and pesticides were basically eliminated, and the only EPA section was saying that the EPA needs to do a better job explaining to the public why pesticides and chemicals are safe. Okay, so that was not good.
Well, I do recall that, and I do recall getting somewhat crazed over the exclusion and the dropping of the pesticide information, because that is driving the chronic disease epidemic. We're no stranger to this topic. I wrote that first book on it. So, okay, so this is the scenario that we have going into Maha. And since RFK took office, do you think we're seeing tangible progress, like toward the goals such as prevention, chronic disease reduction, environmental health agendas? Like, what would you say are some of our successes to date? It's only been a year that Bobby's been in that position as Secretary of HHS. What are his appointments? What's your sense of how it's landing after just 1 year?
I know, in just 1 year, there's been so much that's happened. And just to clarify too, Bobby Kennedy only has purview over the HHS, which is FDA, CDC, NIH, and some other smaller groups, but he does not have purview over or any ability to influence really the EPA or the USDA. So that really carves out a lot of the areas that I specifically work on. But within HHS, there's been some incredible things, of course, starting with the recent dietary guideline overhaul.
Let's start with that, because the upside down food pyramid, that I was so surprised to see that hit, because that's what the original food pyramid looked like in 1962, and it was proposed by a nutritionist. I think her name was Louise Lytle or something like that. And then industry got their little claws in there and then flipped it around. So can you tell us a little bit about the food pyramid? That, as pediatrician, that is near and dear to my heart.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I just loved everything about the way they did this, with the graphics that came out and this new celebration of whole real food. That is something that we've been talking about for some time. So steering away from the ultra processed, the grains, the things that are contributing to chronic disease. We're eating these things that are frankly like lacking nutrition at this point and doing no benefit whatsoever to children's health. Mm-hmm. So to see the pyramid flipped, and actually it reminds me, I was telling my mom, it's like what I grew up on, where, we had a serving of meat, we had a serving of fruit, a serving of vegetable, and it was like reasonable servings. They were whole, they were cooked at home, and we were really healthy. And so it's more returning back to that, and having less of the grains and less of the sugar, and higher, actually, I don't know whether they actually named it, but there's been a stress on saturated fats. Mm-hmm. And with whole milk back in the picture. So all these things that should have always been, because they make so much sense, but of course there's so much criticism already, as you probably heard. What were your reflections on it?
Well, I thought bringing full fat into children's diets, like it's back on the school lunch menu instead of this kind of watered down, milk like, low fat skim product. Children need full fats. It's not that they don't need full fats, it's where the fats are coming from. When you have CAFO cows producing the milk, not so good. When you have pasture raised, grazed cows who are producing the dairy, much better. And it's sourcing it. And that's something we always neglect. Even in all the scientific data and the research that is reported on saturated fat, they never talk about the sourcing of the animals, where the animals are treated, what they ate. You are what your animals ate. So if they're fed a rich diet of pesticides or grains, that quality of that milk is not going to be good, or any of the other fats. The same is true for meat. It's not necessarily the meat that's causing the problem, is where it's sourced and what's in the meat. So it's the health of the animal. So,
I was really thinking that when I saw these pictures too of this ideal situation, but then I'm looking at it also, and as we've learned in some of the food testing, a lot of times the ultra processed food is actually pretty low in pesticides because it's so processed that it does end up there. But then you have like lettuce and spinach and those things that are the worst on pesticide contamination. You think, gosh, you overall, it would be interesting to see, because it could be that now the pesticide exposure becomes more, or the chemicals that are used in conventional dairy farming too. I was picturing the same thing, because it's not like they're all getting A2 milk from Alexander's and
So, this is something that I hope Bobby will take up. Certainly, is the sourcing and the pesticides, and we're going to get into that pesticide issue. Kelly, what do you think has had the most resistance? Has it been the nutrition, the pesticides, pharmaceuticals, environmental exposures? Have you found that there's a certain area that meets with the most resistance in terms of what's happening?
So I am so amazed to watch this happen, because in my mind, I thought that pharmaceuticals were even with pesticides in terms of their lobbying power. And, there's so much money spent behind that. But I can safely say, by watching what's going down right now, pharmaceuticals are nothing in comparison to pesticides. I think that pesticides are where they are going to die on behalf of the pesticide companies, these politicians. And it just really blows my mind. The only thing I can think of with why this would be is there is this extra element in a layer in pesticides that you don't have with pharmaceutical companies or big food, because you can have President Trump tell pharmaceutical companies, hey, we're not doing it anymore. Just step back. You're not going to be making those profits. With pesticides and farming, you have this whole layer of the conventional farmers that are there to defend it, defend their well-being. That's a whole new constituency of Americans that are fighting on behalf of the corporations, which gets so much trickier. And I think that's the difference.
I had such a sarcastic chuckle to myself when I read that Bayer was suing Pfizer.
I know. Can you believe that?
I it was a sarcastic inner chuckle. I mean, it's nothing funny about it, but I thought, are you freaking kidding me? I was just like, any thoughts about that? Because here we have Bayer, one of the biggest pharmaceutical industries and perhaps one of the biggest in the world, now is struggling. And we're going to get into the pesticide issue. And Pfizer doing quite well, especially since COVID, right? So any thoughts about this little upcoming, lawsuit against these two giants?
Isn't it just amazing? I didn't even know there was anything going on there at all, or that there were any claims that could be made on behalf of Bayer that it was their technology. I mean, I'm floored. But if they want to sue each other into oblivion, that is fine with me. I just hope they take each other out.
Right. Let's just spend millions or billions on lawyers and just, tie it up in court for the next, couple of decades, and they can deplete their resources. But, so this is our crazy, crazy world that we're in. Before we kind of get out of this MAHA section into some other topics I want to talk to you about, what would meaningful MAHA progress look like for children and families? Because on this show, we try to be solutionaries. That's Ruth Westreich's terminology. I use it every show. What would progress look like for families? Because it's all about families to me. That's my lens, my perch. I'm just constantly drilling down. What do you think? These are just your thoughts about that.
What is exciting to me is, and because remember, we went to DC together with a team, And we met with the USDA people that were head of school lunches.
Yes, we did.
We did that. And remember, the only thing it seemed that they had any control over at all was potentially lowering salt and sodium in food. And that was the extent of it.
And yeah, otherwise, I remember there were just rooms full of crickets chirping. That was about as I recall.
Crickets. Between that and then going over to, and also you were in the meeting with Jim Jones, who was head of human foods under Biden, and telling him, and Dr. Pero was there talking about the toxicity of the heavy metals and the formula and what it does to the children's brains. And then, we're all shown the door. There's no follow-up. I mean, amazing you could do that just as a human being after hearing this emergency, right?
So that was, hats off to Moms Across America for piloting that school lunch study. That was brilliant. And that got me down the road for the infant formula, by the way, is when I saw the result of the school lunch study. And we did go to DC on that. And to Moms Across America's credit, 100% of those school lunches, 43, had toxic metals. 93.7% had glyphosate and its toxic byproduct, AMPA. Pharmaceuticals, veterinary and contraceptives, and no nutrients. Yeah, the kids might as well eat cardboard.
Yeah.
And we go to the FDA with those very findings and like nothing. And they themselves knew about infant formula because it was in their own food report that they produce every few years. They had tested 4 formulas and 2 had uranium in them. I was like, folks, and so I would love to see that change at the FDA. We mentioned briefly a change at the EPA, but even change at the FDA, they need to get excited about what our children, I think it's 30 million school lunches served a day. Mm-hmm. We can change that food pyramid all we want, but if it's laden with chemicals, this is not going to go well for our children.
And so that's the question, like, can we, so at what point does the EPA come and start getting involved in that conversation? Or when does Brooke Rollins feel, who, by the way, is, I think, actually she's head of the USDA, is doing a good job in partnering and furthering MAHA in many elements, but she is completely surrounded by the lobbyists in the same way that EPA does, because it appears to me, and I'm sure this is accurate, that Kennedy has been able to clean house at HHS of all those corporate interests, and the other agencies have not done that. So now, by and large, and I'm sure there's still some around, but the people that are actively advising and working with Kennedy aren't these people that are straight from industry. And I think that that's the huge difference of why now they're going to look at the formulas. Now they're going to take some of these disgusting chemicals out of the food. Now they're going to be revamping the grass loophole. And it's so interesting that once you get those corporate interests out of the direct line of leadership, you can see action, which means it should be possible across the board, but we need that kind of leadership in each of the agencies.
Well, maybe we should just take a minute before we get into the pesticides and SCOTUS, which is I'm dying to ask you. Maybe just a minute on the EPA. I know we're both not experts on the EPA, and I was just kind of prepping for the show, looking at EPA history, 1970s, Rachel Carson stopping DDT, terrific start in momentum, but then something happened. Did they lose funding? Did they not have enough prestige? Were they surrounded by lobbyists or industry? And now they are certainly not focused on children's health. There is no promotion on looking at developmental windows that affect children. It's this kind of post-marketing that they do after the fact, after the exposures. In your opinion, you're in DC a lot. What do you think is the problem with the EPA? What's going on?
I'm not sure that there's any worth left at the EPA. There probably are some marginal things to keep it from being totally out of control. In terms of being proactive, it blows my mind that in this moment of infertility that we have in this country and the crashing testosterone and sperm count levels, that right now there wouldn't be an emergency, all hands on deck, let's save our fertility. Just that alone, that should be completely in line with the Republicans and what they want and what they see as necessary. Very pro-life, very pro-family. President Trump has said, let's have babies. All of that. Yet there's this confusing thing that people like to think is confusing and mysterious about crashing fertility. You and I know exactly where that's coming from. And at some point along the line, the EPA and I think it was very early on, actually, when you start looking in the early days of glyphosate, and it was first called a human carcinogen. And then Monsanto got their grips on the situation and changed that lickety split. And so it was really in those early days already that it had been captured. And under Ronald Reagan, in particular, he came in with such a deregulatory angle and to his entire administration, and the EPA was not going to be very pro-business. And so I think that the dismantling really began around that time. And each administration that's come along, there have been some minor variations, but by and large, it's been deregulatory and not putting into place some of the things that Congress has passed. So they could definitely be more forceful with the Toxic Substance Control Act. The endocrine disruption screening program should be in place with all of these chemicals that we're exposed to, yet never is enacted. So they've just opted to continue to side with corporations. And I mean, it's almost fictional what's happening there. That it even is an agency with the things that they're allowing into our environment and into our bodies.
So there's a possibility. Now, I was kind of researching, Kelly, whether the HHS could step into the EPA, and it really can't. The EPA is its own agency. And as you mentioned initially, HHS does not have jurisdiction over the EPA. However, there is a possibility that MAHA-inspired, thinkers can become on advisors for the EPA. And particularly with a focus on our children's well-being and chronic disease in kids. When I wrote that first book, 54% of American children had a chronic disease. It's closer now to probably to 70%. Mm-hmm. And I want to remind our listeners that here in the great state of California, rates of chronic disease are way higher. Autism, 12.5%. And boys, we have some of the worst statistics in the country, which might be another show in the future. But for now, do you think, in your opinion, with your experience, that this may be a good way to go to instead of dismantling the EPA, reinventing the EPA? What are your thoughts on that?
There's so many different specific things that could be done to revamp and remodel the EPA. In fact, I wrote an article a couple of years ago on a gut renovation of the EPA, because there's so many things within it that no longer make sense. They're old-fashioned. Just the way that they do the very analyses that they require. The fact that the microbiome isn't even taken into consideration when we know it's so core to our well-being. There's so many things that need to be modernized. And of course, what would be more wonderful than having a precautionary principle approach to regulation like Europe does, right? Would that be so hard?
I just thought of this. Who should be responsible for GMO regulation? Because my understanding is that it is a wild west in the GMO world, that it is wildly unregulated, that genetic engineering is a laboratory free-for-all. Anybody with $169 can buy a kit on Amazon, honestly, is the truth. So when the DARK Act passed in 2016, we were not allowed to be told that we were eating anything GMO. It's so hush-hush. Who's regulating it? Where is the regulatory body in DC presently? Do you know?
So that is the FDA should be able to come in there, and that is under Kennedy purview. It is hard because some of it falls a little bit, like there are parts of it that fall under the EPA because of the neonics that are on the dip seeds that are used for the corn dip seeds. So that's like over there. And there are certain elements also of the seeds, that are the BT component that fall also under the EPA. But whether or not they land in our food supply, and that labeling issue really falls under the FDA, which is hopeful because we know how that they're going to be a little bit more cautious when they're labeled. To the point that I would like to see the FDA, when they close the generally recognized as safe loophole, they're going to be going through not only future chemicals that are recommended for use in the food supply, but also going retroactively and looking and seeing what things have slid in through this loophole, things like, the ingredients of the Impossible Burger, and seeing whether or not they're actually safe, because those companies never even had to do any kind of safety tests at all. They just were able to convince the government to go ahead and let them into our food supply.
Just as a reminder, that Impossible Burger made by Impossible Foods initially was denied across. It was initially denied by the FDA, came back around again, probably with more money, and then they said, okay, you guys can submit your own data on the Impossible Burger, and they let it slide through. And maybe we'll do a show just on the Impossible Burgers. That thing alone is like think twice before you want to consume that. So, this is maybe this would be a good pivot into getting into pesticides and what's happening with the recent announcement by President Trump, who supported legal indemnity for large agricultural companies. Everybody's aware of that, like Bayer. And what this means for families and kids. Of course, that's what I'm always interested in. And what is happening with SCOTUS? Because this is taking the jump up. What may it look like for states versus federal legislation? And I know the Monsanto versus Darnell case is coming up before the Supreme Court. Can you give us a little backstory on what's happening there from your perspective, Kelly?
Yes. So when I started in 2018 blogging these trials, and writing about the details of what was happening in the glyphosate trials for the first three, I was so amazed because the argument that they always came back to, Bayer Monsanto always came back to, was this can't be true that it causes cancer because the EPA said that it's safe. The EPA, we trust the EPA. The EPA says it's safe. It must be fine. And this was always their line of argument. And it's interesting because juries weren't buying it, which showed sort of an underlying distrust, I think, of government regulation, which was interesting. And then they were able to come out, the plaintiff attorneys, so the ones that were representing the victims, came out and they showed documents that exhibited improved more than cozy relationship between the corporation, Monsanto, and the EPA, and how those decisions can be easily manipulated through ghost writing of research, through direct relationships with the decision makers. And you really can get a lot through the EPA. And that just appears to be how they managed to keep things on the market with no label. So Bayer then had over 100,000 different lawsuits, people coming out and saying that it gave them non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, the exposure to Roundup did. And so then their stock price just started to crash because at this point they're $12 billion into settlements. And not everything's going to court, by the way. Occasionally you'll see Bayer come out and say, we're winning half of the trials. But the truth is that they've settled everything out of court, like thousands and thousands, because they know they're going to lose if they go to court. So now they're in this potentially facing bankruptcy if they keep this litigation going. So a couple of years ago, they came out and they said, we have a multi-pronged strategy to get rid of this litigation. One was to get some state level legislation passed to make it basically impossible to sue pesticide manufacturers. Then they said, we're not only going to do that in the state, we're going to do it federally as well and pass it through Congress and Senate. And we're going to get bills that say you can't sue pesticide manufacturers. And then they appealed up a glyphosate case that just kept going and going, and that now finally has reached the Supreme Court, as you were saying. And that's going to happen in April. And the Supreme Court justices are going to decide if the EPA says that, in this case, glyphosate doesn't cause cancer, should anyone be able to sue if it does? And Bayer's arguing they shouldn't be because the EPA is the end-all be-all authority. So this probably sounds familiar because this is what happened with vaccines. And that, once you put a liability shield up around any corporation, it just instills absolutely no incentive. It's a disincentive to do anything responsible, because why, if you're not going to be sued, why would these corporations that are just looking to maximize profit possibly take any precautions for human health at all? So it really is just losing for all life.
So there are some states that are taking this up on their own right now. With this indemnity protection for big ag, for Bayer, for the major. It's not just Bayer, it's Syngenta, it's ConAg. There are a few companies, and from my understanding, it's Tennessee, North Dakota, Georgia. Can you talk a little bit about why some states are finding the need to protect big ag against citizens and children? And then I want to get into a little bit on what families can do. Is there going to be any state regulation? Is the FDA going to do the dark act on us again and put like a seal on states' ability to create their own policies regarding pesticide exposure and indemnity? Can you give us a little feel about that, Kelly?
Yeah. So what's happening? So last year, despite enormous campaigns from many of us, Georgia and North Dakota both passed pesticide liability shields. So if you reside in those two states now and you get sick from any of 57,000 different chemicals. So we're not just talking Roundup. You can no longer sue the pesticide manufacturers for failing to warn you. So that is so heartbreaking, because how many people do we know between landscapers, children, there are cancer pockets all over the place, farmers that are so ill with Parkinson's and ALS and all these things that are coming from pesticide exposure, yet now we've removed any ability for them or their families to be suing. So it's insanity. So now they are back with a vengeance this year. So that happened last year. This year they're coming back to multiple other states. I think it's 10 states in total. And they're going to the big ag states and basically telling lies that people want to take away their pesticides to the farmers. They're telling the farmers, people want to take away the pesticides, and the only way that we can show them is by giving the ultimate protection, so you can't sue anymore, and then you'll be able to keep your pesticides. And there are all these pro-glyphosate, pro-pesticide billboards going up in these states. Like, people send pictures of them to me, all funded by Bayer, just to protect their bottom line, their stock price. And meanwhile, the farmers are the very ones on the front line of exposure. So this is certainly not pro-farmer legislation. And it's amazing it's gotten this far. So yeah, so tomorrow, Tennessee, it's the very last committee before it goes to a floor vote. So if it doesn't stop there, Tennessee is likely going to get this awful legislation also passed. That'll be the third state that falls to it. And these are all pretty big ag states. You have all the corn, you have the cotton in Georgia. North Dakota has all of the GMO things, and Tennessee has it as well, between the cotton, tobacco, all these things that are very intensive, pesticide intense. But amazingly, and I couldn't believe this, my friend just told me they've also refiled in Florida, which had a huge uprising last year, and it was shot right down. So hopefully it'll happen again. But they're coming back for Florida too, to try and get a liability shield. And in North Carolina, I mean, it's hitting everywhere.
This is reminiscent of what we dealt with grocery manufacturing money, which has since changed their name to the Consumer Brand Association. When we were trying to label GMOs here in the state of California in 2014, many of us were deep in that labeling proposition that failed, because so much money poured into the state by Grocery Manufacturers Association, where companies like Pepsi and Abbott and all these different corporations poured in money, creating doubt. They created, so voters voted against the proposition because they created fear and doubt that we were going to take something away versus giving them something. And so the proposition got blocked. But then the proposition failed in a few other states, but it passed in Vermont to label GMOs. As soon as it passed in one state, the feds came in and clamped down and said no labeling. So this, to me, what's happening now in indemnity, not quite the same issue, but is reminiscent of the federal government stepping in when states are, rocking the boat. But in this case, states are rocking pro-pesticide companies.
Yeah, they're willingly signing up. And it's so strange to me, because these red states tend to be very states' right based. So what is happening here, that they're willingly signing off their rights for their citizens to no longer have any power when they get sick from exposure? It is blowing my mind that it's that powerful.
And I just want to be clear, there is so much material on the harm from glyphosate-based herbicides and its toxic end products, not to mention all the other pesticides out there. I mean, the average food has 6+ pesticides, and there's almost zero data of something called negative synergism, the toxicity from when there's more than one pesticide in a food formulation. When you have 6 or 7 in very small doses, can make it more toxic. So there is no doubt in the literature of the endocrine disruption, immunologic disruption, neurologic disruption, of the effects of glyphosate, chronic kidney disorder. I just read a paper today how Americans are facing chronic kidney disease. I think it was Mercola who wrote on it, actually. And no mention of glyphosate.
Oh my, there was no mention?
I stand I'm a fan of Dr. Mercola, but I scanned it quickly. I'm like, oh, chronic kidney disease, glyphosate. It's called Mesoamerican nephropathy. Half the farm workers in Central America have kidney disease from glyphosate in the sugarcane industry, or Sri Lanka had the same problem. I mean, massive numbers of chronic kidney disorder from glyphosate. But I digress there. So this, to me, is sort of, I feel like we're in a deja vu moment And is there any way the average American citizen can influence Supreme Court, or like, oh, there's no possible influence, or can we? Is there a way that the average citizen can say, no, we don't want this, through Maha, other voices? What are your thoughts?
So I would say there definitely is. And I recently learned this because I stared with horror last week as Supreme Court took up this case, because I've been working really hard, as have many others, to try and get it not to be taken up by the Supreme Court. And then they still did. So they're like, okay, now what? But lawyers have said that if you can make this as loud as possible and really get it into media and really show that people do not want this to happen, it can influence. And so we're going with that idea, is to not feel hopeless. And I do think that that's accurate. How can we make this louder? And one of the things that I've done is you can go to stoppoison.org and you can sign up. And I have a whole sign up sheet and system. And I will contact you with our calls to action. So things like writing letters. We're likely going to be having some rallies, some social media campaigns. So there are a lot of things that are in the works between now and April, when the hearings start at the Supreme Court. So that is definitely something that can be done. The other thing is, with this information, I always am hopeful that people will take it even to small discussions, the people that never think about these things, and start using your most entertaining voice possible to engage people in this issue. Because unlike something like food dyes that you can see, part of the problem is you cannot see these chemicals. So it doesn't feel real until you're sick. And then, and then oftentimes it's too late. So really getting this just as a topic of conversation in your circles was also a really big deal. So those are the two things.
I couldn't emphasize that enough. And as part of our solutionary tactics here on the new MDs, is that, there's a get off the couch movement, that someone's not going to do this for you, that we all have to do it. It's not just Michelle's or Kelly's. This is everybody's concern. Whoever thought that putting poison on our food and eating it was a good idea?
Yeah.
Pesticides are biocides. That means kill life. If you don't think that that is killing your gut with every bite, you're grossly mistaken. I've spent the past decades treating people with gut disorders. The number of gut disorders has skyrocketed, and it's because of the poisoning of our food. It's the pesticides and the GMOs that created to sustain the spraying of the pesticides. And I want to make it clear, we've done lots of shows on this, and I just digress here again, Kelly, that GMOs are not benign. If you want to call genetic modifications, genetic engineering is not a benign process. And that has health ramifications as well. So while we were always supporting organic regenerative and our organic regenerative farmers, we also have to weigh in here. So thank you for sharing that website. Thank you for getting that over. Everyone has time to write an email. Stop your scrolling for a minute, everybody. Get on this, sign, conduct, show common ground in your house, weigh in with your own legislators, whoever you've got sitting in Congress. I couldn't stress that enough, that we all have to become citizen activists, citizen advocates, citizen scientists, whatever it takes to motivate. And that's what we need to do.
And I'm so glad you said that, because I think that there's also a misconception that there are a lot of us. There aren't. Like, we know who we are. Like, there aren't. It's like it's more than a handful, but it's not a ton of people. I don't even know that it's 100 people that are really working on this all the time. And so you think about that in a whole country, we need so much more effort and so much more rallying around this being an important issue, because I know, and polls show, that most Americans overwhelmingly do not like pesticides in their food. So this means this is a common ground issue that we all can rally around, and everyone. So you say, oh, I don't even know where to start. And I'll tell you quickly my personal story. I didn't know where to start. And when I learned about pre-harvest desiccation with glyphosate, and I happened to hear a business school friend of mine say, you know what, you should just put a blog out there, because you'd be surprised. Sometimes people read things and then just get it out there. Look what happened. So it's like, what is your mode of communication, and can you go there and do that? Is it at a PTA meeting where you can give a quick talk on pesticides or just healthy food? Like, what is that venue that you might already have at your disposal that you can use?
this is sort of creating empowerment in families and parents, because what we're witnessing is, if indeed this the Supreme Court rules in favor of big ag and bear in this case, well, parents are going to have to even step up further to protect their own children. There will be no protection from the state or federal regulators or the government. It's going to be individual families protecting their own children. And so this is a call out to form community no matter what happens. And we are going to try and fight this from having in the Supreme Court, which we don't want to see happen, indemnity. I think that building community and creating your own networks, creating healthy food for our children, what's making our kids sick, number one, is poisoning of our food supply. That's number one. It's multimodal. It's multifactorial, Kelly. It's not just one thing, but little kids sometimes are eating 6 times a day.
Yeah.
And so if we reduce the toxic load, we will reduce the level of illness that our children are facing. And it's not just our children. For those of you who don't have kids, what about your dog? 2/3 of dogs under 10 years old will develop cancer. The number one cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. If you saw what went into dog food, it's some of the worst food left over. I won't even get into it. I've looked into this. It's horrifying. So, okay, you don't love kids or animals. Maybe you're a plant person. It's affecting your plants. Did your garden not do so well last summer? Mine didn't. And so we can even get in, right?
I didn't either, but yeah.
But that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
So this is where this is our call to action. And so I'm just so glad you're here talking to this about with us today for the call for action. I think it may be one of the biggest things facing us. Does Ma have any input regarding this, what's happening in the Supreme Court? What's Ma?
They aren't actively, they are doing some campaign posting, which is great, but there's not really an organized MAHA effort to do something about it at this point. So it's really up to us, to really be taking it on ourselves, and so yeah, and we can, and hopefully Bear doesn't win, but if they do, then we're going to need a future show, because it's going to be a whole new ball game. It is going to be, we have to go into hyper protective mode, because there will be no catch at all for any of these exposures. And that's going to just be a new era. But we can do it. If that's what happens, then we'll deal with it, and we'll just keep on informing, and that's what we'll do. So
I think that point can't be stressed enough. There will be no regulatory oversight. There will be no federal protection. It's going to be a freaking free-for-all. And this is what we want to prevent. Prevent is better than treatment. We've learned that on the medical front. We really don't want to treat it, especially when we have these measures that we can enact. I think you mentioned something early, and I didn't want to get into any talk today, but we can see what happened with indemnity with the national vaccine NVIC that happened in 1986, when vaccine companies got indemnity. So it also I'd say companies are not as motivated to create a better product because they have this indemnity. So we've seen this in action since 1986. Can you speak for that? We have an actual event that happened with indemnity and the fallout of companies not making better products. Do you want to talk about that? What indemnity does for our listeners?
Yeah, well, and as you know, this isn't totally my area of expertise, but I've gotten to know it more because of this situation we're facing with pesticides, because it's really the same thing. Where in vaccines, it was inconvenient that people were getting sick from it. It was a blow to the bottom line of pharmaceutical companies that manufactured these vaccines. So what do? You strip the ability to sue away, you quiet those voices, and you just increase the number of vaccines because you can't be sued. This is, and by the way, not test them, which is something we're also going to see directly happening with pesticides, although now the testing is not great anyway, but at least we can sue. Similarly, and I know it's something that they're working on at HHS, how do we break this liability shield at this point? Because it is so hard once these things are in place to get rid of them. That's the thing. It's so much easier to get them in place than it is to ever retract it once it's in action. So it's not something we should be looking at the vaccine situation and thinking that really did not pan out. And I think for the MAHA movement in general, that is something that is really under consideration. And the idea that really there should never be any type of corporate immunity just because of the behavior that irresponsible behavior then that comes out of the corporations.
Well said, Ms. Ryerson. Thank you so much for that. Right, corporations don't get a pass for bad behavior and creating, toxic products. They do not get a legal pass. And I think that's all we're simply saying here is you can't create something that's toxic, hurt people, and then want to pass from it.
It's like, you can't. You can't. How silly does that sound when you say that? I can't even believe we're here with this.
It extends beyond even the realm or the borders of common sense. It doesn't even fall into common sense. So, okay, I will just pivot. Yes.
One last thing. What's sad about it is that coming off of these glyphosate trials, I think for all of us, it was really exciting to see finally that Monsanto and Bayer were getting the punishment they deserve for all the years of poisoning. So it's been really, especially in the beginning, there was a lot of elation around it that finally, it was the first time that Monsanto's ever gone up in front of a jury and the jury agreed this is super corrupt. And it was this real win for everyone that is in this movement. And so now to see it stripped away probably brings Bayer a lot of delight. But that is so disappointing because we were so on the precipice of having a collapse of the system, or at least, a reduction at this point now that the harms have been identified. So it's a sad moment, but it could end up okay if the Supreme Court goes the way we want it to.
What's the feel from Congress? Are they weighing in on regarding this pesticide shield bill that's happening? Because I know Maha was very effective in getting some language out of the bill. Thank you, Maha. Maybe we can talk about that. And also, Kelly, before as we come to this last segment of our show, can we talk a little bit about the Farm Bill?
Yes, let's do that.
Let's do that. So maybe you want to address one on the way of time for both of those. Maybe you want to address one that appeals to you. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay, great. Well, so I'll just combine the two. Bayer is trying at any possible avenue to get legislation in place to put a pesticide liability shield in place. So once again, to make this clear, this is happening at the state level, at the Supreme Court, and has the support of the White House, and is happening in federal Congress. Okay, so this is happening all over, this pesticide liability shield. 453 was legislation that Bayer was trying to slide into a big spending bill. They do this because spending bills are this thick. Like, there's so much in it that you can pretty easily get small things put through, even if they're huge, but just a few words here and there that seem innocuous. Totally not innocuous, but that's how it would seem to the casual reader or the staffer who's reading through the bill, even if they even read it. So just to raise enough awareness that it even exists was the first step. And then to say why it was trickily worded and not understandable to understand that if they made it hard to realize that it was actually a liability shield. So it's hidden. And so then you have to educate the congressperson about why it's hidden. And it is really hard. So we were able to be successful in 453, but the head of the House Ag Committee, G.T. Thompson from Pennsylvania, Republican, he is proudly boasting that he's going to have it back in the upcoming Farm Bill. Again, even though his own party, the Maha contingency that is within President Trump's party is saying, we don't want this. He is proudly boasting it. And it is so frustrating. So that will be in the Farm Bill, the House version of it. And now we just have to wait and see whether or not the final bill that Senate will also have to weigh in on will also have that version of the liability shield. Senate tends to be less inclined to put that in. House seems more viable by Bayer and Big Ag, and happy to just go ahead and poison us if they want to, or these people that are behind it. And it's not just it's primarily Republicans, but there are also some Democrats that are standing up also for pesticide liability shield. So it's not like it's just one party.
So, okay, I want to reiterate that last point. You heard it here, folks, that this is not a direct party line. Our Republicans are promoting it and Democrats are fighting against it. It seems like there's a purple blend of support for this indemnity shield. I once read, and I can't remember the amount of how much money Bayer gave to lobby to our Congress people. It was a lot of money. In lobbying dollars. There's a lot of money being distributed out there. Maybe we need to put stops on how much you can give our Congress people. I think in the UK, there are limits on how much Congress, how much they don't call them Congress members. their legislators can, their parliament, thank you, can receive, I think it's like, 100,000 euros or something like that. There's a limit on what, and perhaps this is what we need to do
Yeah.
is stop the flow of money into the hands of our legislators. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh my gosh, I would love that. And it's so interesting when I go to these congressional offices because a lot of times, Bear will have just been there. They are there perpetually, perpetually there, always there with these answers. They're wonderful salespeople. They are very likable people that come in. And I don't know how over time, unless you have some really compassionate Senate and Congress people, we can continue, and we're seeing right now that we can't really because we're being overwhelmed by these poor policy decisions to the detriment of our health. But without and until there is a cut or at least a dramatic reduction in pesticide or in lobbying around pesticides or anything, I don't think we can expect that much change because this is who they're hearing all the time. We have to scrounge for money from donors who are very generous and get our couple of days in DC, and then we leave. We're not permanently there working on this. And so I don't see how it's even possible to really be the dominant voice.
Bobby did a wonderful thing, especially in the initial early days of when he became secretary, and he talked about how much money some of the senators had received from pharma, and he made it public in one of those speeches. It was shocking, and I don't even know how those people live with themselves. Some of the senators he reported on, just a few of them. Doesn't matter who they were now, but the point being is that there is, I think, a website. I think it's called Open Secrets, where you can go look and see how much money, for example, Bayer has given to various legislators and the amounts. Maybe we need to start circulating that information pretty regularly on who's receiving what money from what state and their party.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what Bayer and some of these other big ad companies do is they give indiscriminately to both parties.
Yeah.
And so that everyone, and Anne, thank you, Anne Temple, our producer, is on it, showing you all these links. But perhaps, Kelly, this is what we need to do, is to keep reporting how much money these people are getting from these lobbying dollars. This just needs to stop. And you're so right. We are small organizations, Glyphosate Facts, GMO Science, Moms Across America. We have to scrounge for, from our private funders. And this money is not, it's not abundant.
It is not.
And a lot of this we do on our own time, our own dime. Getting ourselves to places where we need to be and just hoping we can swing it and make it work financially. I don't think they're doing that. I don't think they're doing that in DC, but we're doing it. So maybe we need to see some real change. Maybe this will be on Bobby's agenda. Maybe we can get it in front of him. I don't know. But in the meantime, what can folks do? We talked about going to your website to sign, become active. And then I'll give parents a few solutions here to wrap up so people just don't do hurry on the way out of here. Like, oh my God, what do we do? Any wrap up suggestions from you before I, give some closing ideas what families can do?
I think that to deter the panic that could ensue from considering this, I just want to state that I really don't want this to happen. If it happens, I still presume that I'm going to be able to keep my kids healthy. And I'm feeling very fortunate to be really educated in this, as I'm sure any of your viewers are already. And so, you know what, we're just going to become stronger and be more in defense of ourselves until the rest figures itself out. So I am not, in other words, panicking at this moment. It's really an unfortunate thing. And I'm so overworked at the moment, but it doesn't mean that we're not going to be able to continue to take control of our own health.
I couldn't agree more. So empowerment begins in your own kitchen. So let me just wrap up with a few things that families can do. You heard of the political acts you can do. We call these actionable items. Please get involved, whatever way you can, whether it's your own family, your community, your town council, your school, whether you go to your own legislator or to the state or the government, and keep abreast of what's happening with Kelly, with Zen Honeycutt, with others. But in your own family, what should you do? Number one, you need to do organic food whenever you can, and just keep the pesticides out of your kids' diets. Organic regenerative is what I promote now, but honestly, just stay away from the pesticide-laden foods. The non-GMO label is not enough. That means it doesn't have GMOs. It doesn't mean it doesn't have pesticides. And I can tell you very confidently that Glyphosate is an antibiotic and it is a metal binder. And those two things alone will disrupt your children's ability to use minerals and have a functioning microbiome, which we've discussed on this show before. Next is you've got to use some kind of water filter. You got to get the pesticides and metals out of your water. And that's what you need to do. Next is Whole Foods. Bobby had a great promotion on ultra processed foods, getting them out of our kids' diets, right? We're banning the UPCs and ultra processed foods. That's huge. Couldn't support that enough, but it's even more than that. You've got to cook. Someone's got to cook. And I couldn't stress that enough. Additionally, if you can, please join your children's PTA. Are they spraying around your kid's school? Stop the spray. They shouldn't be spraying around any child's school. We tried to stop that here in California, and we got away with them putting up some 72 hour notice around the school. I think that's as far as we got, Kelly, here in the.
That's as far, and there's this presumption that the pesticides disappear, I guess, overnight.
So there were reports, thank you to Dr. Don Huber on this, where glyphosate has been found in soil 22 years later. So this idea, depending on the pH of the soil, that stuff just breaks down is not true. It's a synthetic amino acid, and it gets incorporated into the proteins of your kid's body. People, that's what it's doing. So get involved in your kid's school. And what I want, maybe Kelly, you can say one word before we wrap up, is people's town councils. I live in a small town. We have a town council. I remember when we banned plastic bags in our town council. We banned GMOs in our town council. So any thoughts about going local before you go global?
Yes. In fact, we recently had, there's another liability shield situation coming up because of it, but in my town in California, we had an amazing group, small group. We were able to change our wireless ordinance to be able to get 5G towers at 500-foot setbacks away from children's bedrooms. This was hard because local politics, politics is the same wherever it was. So it was a lot of just meetings with individual council members and all of that, and getting local news to cover it and pressure. And then we had a thing where Verizon lied and said we locked them in the city council chambers. So, there was a lot of drama. And meanwhile, we're also, a lot of the people on our team are disabled and certainly weren't going and locking anyone into anything. So that's where we are with that. But anyway, so much can be done at the local level to protect you, especially when it comes to this kind of thing. If you don't want pesticides on your kids in the public schools in your district, you go and you start presenting it. And there's a lot of information out there that you can present and say, you don't want this, get other parents around, get kids to come to the city council meetings. When you show up in person to city council, it makes a big difference. We all wore the same color and it looked really powerful as you looked out. And those council people just want to be reelected. So they are going to be listening to what you have to say.
Thank you for that. There's power to the people in the local community. I love that. Bring your kids to the council meeting and they'll learn about, civics. Right? They don't need to take civics in high school. They can learn it right up there, upfront and personal. And then for most town councils, when you go, you get your 3-minute speech that you're allowed to talk. And then it goes on the record. Mm-hmm. And if you come organized as a group, it's really impactful, can make a difference. Kelly, this has been a great conversation today. I've learned so much. Thank you for your time and your wisdom and for doing what you do. If you can just let our listeners know, how do they get in touch with you? How do they reach you if they want to?
Yes. So you can email me at info@glyphosatefacts.com. And that's my email. And you can also find me as Glyphosate Girl on Instagram and X. So I'm also there. My other organization is called American Regeneration, and we're working on regenerative agriculture things as well. So, but those are the primary ones where you can reach me.
Thank you for that, Kelly. And for those of you, please sign up for my newsletter, gmoscience.org. I won't kill you with tons of stuff. I have a Substack for GMO Science as well, and that's really lots of parent stuff on there. info@gmoscience.org is also how you get a hold of me if you want to reach out to me. The next book will be out pretty soon. Thanks so much. Feel free to donate to our organizations. We are all working on a shoestring. GMO Science is a 501c3. And I'd also like to say before we close is that for those of us who've been doing this for a long time, we have found community and friendship amongst each other. So if you are the lone wolf out there, the lone voice, the mama bear, and everybody else is here and you're over here, we have community and we have networks. And there are just so many places where you join up and you can meet like-minded people, growing our network of like-mindedness. So on that note, I'd like to say, see you all next month for the next episode of the New MDs, and reach out if you need us.